Welcome back to bonus video 2 for week 1. Today I want to explain something that's very misunderstood but still worth knowing about, called the histogram. The histogram. I threatened you with it earlier, so let's go into Bridge and let me just show you an example in Adobe Camera Raw of the histogram. The histogram, let's describe what it is. It's actually, and it's up here in that top right hand corner, but it's a series of what look like mountain ranges. They're mountain ranges. And what you see on the left side of the histogram represents the darkest values, the darkest tones, the darkest shades in an image. This is a very dark image, and so you'll notice that there are a lot of very dark, let me just call them crayons. There's a lot of dark crayons in this image. There aren't a lot of bright crayons at all. The bright crayons would be on the right. Bright to the right. Remember that. The brightest tones are the rightest tones. They're on the right of the histogram. And the way the histogram lines up is as if you had multiple crayons, if you want to help me use this analogy, lined up in a row. And whatever's on the right, of course, are going to be the brighter crayons, the bright crayons. They just line up in a row like this. Now, every now and then you'll see some spikes in that mountain range. There are spikes. And the taller the mountains, or the taller the spikes, the more of that color, that particular crayon, is being used in this image. If you'll see a spike that drops very low, it says, well, it's in there, represented somewhere in some pixels, but there aren't a lot of pixels that utilize that crayon. That explains how to read the histogram. Now let's talk about how it's misunderstood. Most teaching on the histogram I find appallingly wrong. It's wrong. Most teaching by professionals is that if you have a histogram that isn't balanced, if your crayons aren't balanced, or if you don't have a mountain right in the middle, then your image is not good. It's not useful. It's not usable. That advice is wrong. It's wrong. What if I wanted an image that was mainly dark? Well, then having a histogram whose mountain range was on the left side would make perfect sense. If you were shooting an image that's called high key, very, very bright background, you would expect a high key, a bright highlight. You'd expect a big mountain on the right side. It's okay. First misconception is that you need an equalized histogram. It's not true. All right. This is a very dark image. And I've opened it in Adobe Camera Raw. Now you might look at an image like this and think that of the several photos that you took, that this one is really actually too dark. But look what I do in Adobe Camera Raw, one-handed, two-fingered. I'm gonna do Command U. Command U for you figure it out, computer. Adobe Camera Raw. Command U on the Mac. Control U, you figure it out on the PC. Control U. And there it is. It got rescued. Control U. I'm going to undo. Control or Command U. You figured out. And there, and notice I have a new and improved, perhaps, histogram. Watch the histogram as I undo. Command or Control Z. Watch the histogram. That's what it was. Command or Control U, and that's what it is. I could use this. I actually have to judge it and say, yeah, I think this is an improvement over the original. You've learned a new keyboard shortcut. And now you know how to basically read the histogram. Let's go up and check out more about the histogram. I'm going to take my cursor and just hover. And you'll notice that when I hover, a word shows up. I can't point to it because it goes away, but when I'm in the histogram, look right below my cursor. Do you see the word exposure? If I keep going, bloop, I'm back into that camera data. But just before I drop under the baseline of the histogram, I'm getting the word exposure. Now, over here on the right side, far right side, go back and look where the word exposure had been written. And now it says whites. So you'll see that as I move, I'm not clicking, I'm just dragging over the histogram. I'm getting these little gray shaded ranges. It's coding the crayons, the shades that fall within that zone. These are the whites. These are the highlights. Now notice the highlights. The highlights are over on the right side, but they're not on the far right side. The highlights fall at around the 25%, 10%, 35%, that range of value. If 0% were pure white, the highlights are kicking in at around 10, 20, 25, 30, 35, that sort of range. You don't have to know those values. You can look at it. You can see it. I'm going to keep moving. The midtones are represented by the word exposure. Now that's odd. That's awkward to me. I would expect it to say middle values or mid-tone, something like that. Oh, exposure to me is kind of everything. I'm not sure that that's the right word, but that's the way they're using it here. I'm going to keep moving to the left, away from the brights. And I get something called shadows. And I keep going and I see blacks. So the very blackest blacks, the darkest darks are the blacks. The very brightest brights are the highlights. And what highlights is to the bright side, shadows are to the dark side. Midtones represents the middle. I've got 5 values there. Let's double check them again. Highlights, whites, highlights, exposure, shadows, blacks. Remember that? One last little tease for going into the next bonus video. Look what happens if I actually click and drag one of those zones. Look what happens if I click the histogram and drag it to the right. What if I grab the exposure and drag it to the right? The histogram is not just for feedback. The histogram is editable. The histogram is an editor. Some of you may have been distracted looking at my now phenomenal image, which began as a crappy histogram. At least I was told. But now look, I can rebalance it. Why? To whatever I want. Why? Because this is a raw file. Raw file types can be rescued. They can be salvaged. They can be saved. Don't toss them away. Now, your mileage may vary depending on your camera. More on that if you have questions on yours day. But notice that as I drag the histogram, it's also editing. It's just another way to drag the sliders down below. Exposure is a slider. I'm skipping contrast. That's the one word that is a slider, but it didn't show up as a value range in the histogram. Exposure did. Highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks did. Only contrast does not. But those other 5 values, you can either drag the slider, which is the topic of our next bonus video, or you can drag the histogram itself. And notice my exposure slider is now also dragging. All right. I think this is so cool. Let me teach you another trick. When I'm in Adobe Camera Raw, I may want to save this particular look. I might want to save it. You'll want to teach yourself this keyboard shortcut. So far I've taught you one in this bonus video. Command U. Command U. You figure it out. I asked the computer. It's only a starting point for me on this image. I sometimes like it, but not this time. And so, Command U. Command U. Now, this is the way it looked when I opened it. Here's the second shortcut. Command S for save, or Control S on the PC for save. Control or Command S, save. Oh, that's going to save my image out. That's a good trick. It saves a copy of my baby out. A copy of my baby out so that I can post it on Instagram or Facebook or send it to a customer. Command S, just like any other program, Control S, is save or save a copy. Think of it that way. Command S is save a copy, but Command or Control Shift S is just temporarily save this point in time. Save what's called a snapshot. Save a snapshot. Save this iteration of my working. Now let me tell you what this is like in Photoshop world. In Photoshop, you would save a copy as a separate document. If your image was 50 megabytes, let's just say, and you saved a copy, you've just taken up 50 more megabytes of hard drive space. And then you save another copy, there's 50 more megabytes, and save another copy, 50 more megabytes. Your hard drive starts to get full. Listen to me carefully. When you save a snapshot in Camera Raw, it costs you nothing extra in hard drive space. That was a very tiny little lie on my part. Very, very tiny, because it actually costs you about 12K of info. When was the last time you measured anything on the computer in K? So I'm not really lying. That's the tiniest, itty-bittiest of white lies. It costs you virtually nothing to save a snapshot. So if I save this as my original, O-R-I-G-I-N-A-L. Oh my gosh, I hate typing. I'm an artist. So instead of typing original, I'll often just do 1 and hit OK or return or enter on my keypad. 1, that's the original. Dink. That's what I do. Command U. I might want to save one of those. Command Shift S on the Mac. Control Shift S on the PC. And maybe save that one as U. That's what you figured out. That's what Command U did for me. I could do that. And then I edit and I play and I decide I'm not really sure what I like. I might want, ooh, that looks kind of cool to me. I'm playing either on the histogram. You'll see soon the next bonus video with the sliders. Command Shift S, save as. Near perfect. If I could spell. And it takes too long anyway. So what I like to do is well, that's number 3. This is just my technique. 1, 2, 3. Save it as 3. That was Command Shift S for snapshots. It's time for me to introduce you to the tools. On the far on the far right, upper right side of the Camera Raw editor, you'll see all these little tools. I didn't describe those to you last time. Little bitty tools. Well, one of those tools, look, third from the bottom here, is snapshots. It looks like a bunch of photos stacked on top of each other. And when I hover over it, it tells me what my computer platform's keyboard shortcut is, Shift S. So you could double check that. Shift S was my keyboard shortcut. But if I actually tap it, I get to see all of the versions I've saved over the history of this file. Even if this file is old, that says 2018, 2020, 2021, ACR test, 2016. How old is this file? And there's my, you see what I'm saying there? I can save and go back to any version I ever want, all for no cost in one photo. You can always go back to any one of those and re-begin your workflow. I started back on one of those oldies but goodies, and that's me still editing. Starting from that spot, save as, black and white 2. You can go back in time even if that particular snapshot was 20 years old. It's a raw file. It's a raw file. If I hit cancel, it leaves. It says no harm, no foul. I'll pretend you've never been here. If I hold the Option key or Alt key on the PC and hit cancel, the word cancel becomes reset. Reset. And it just takes me back to the way it was when I first opened it just now. When I opened it just now to begin talking to you about it. Option or Alt, cancel becomes reset for now, the way it was when I just opened it at this work session. All right. I'm going to go look at my snapshots. Tap. Let me go back to my recent favorite. Click Done. That's the one that will be remembered, retained, printed, sent to customers should I do that. But I know that all those iterations are stored in that single document. Let's close it. All right, I'm showing you a little tease talking about the histogram because the histogram isn't just feedback, it's also an editor. What does it do? It edits my tones, my values, my crayons. It does the same thing as the sliders do. In fact, when I edit the histogram, it also edits the sliders. You can create a great image, a great histogram from nearly any histogram. It's a misnomer to say that there's a perfect looking histogram when you take the picture. Okay? You're shooting in RAW now as grown-ups, smart pros, smart objects, you people. And so you have a lot more leeway. All right, second and final misnomer, misteaching about the histogram. On the back of your camera, you could set it to take a photo and then let me see the histogram. This is what that very item looks like on the back of my camera. The histogram on the back of my camera. Here's what I want you to know. Your histogram on the back of your camera is a liar. It's not true. It's inaccurate. Now that's going to blow the minds of some of my super advanced professionals here watching. Because some of you live and die by the histogram. You'll read articles, you'll see YouTube videos telling you to live and die by the histogram. Take a picture and then study that histogram and then do some adjustments and take a new picture to get a better histogram. That's all, for the most part, complete baloney. BS. You're shooting in RAW. That histogram does not represent the raw image. In fact, what it represents is bizarre. Even if you're shooting in RAW, that histogram can be changed. It can be edited. In fact, it's a lie. Why? It's based on what color space you have set up in your camera menus. Now, your mileage is definitely going to vary when you try to sort this out. Where is this on my camera? I'm on a Nikon. And under the Nikon, it's called color space. You'll find the equivalent on your camera. But what you're going to see is that there are always and only two choices on your camera. S, lowercase, RGB, uppercase. sRGB or Adobe RGB. If you want a closer to true histogram, you've got to change your camera's color space from the default, which is sRGB. You must change it to Adobe RGB. Will it affect your RAW file? No. It only affects the histogram and the color image that you see on the back of your display. But if you want the colored image on the back of your display to be more accurate, and you want your histogram to be more accurate, change your color space to Adobe RGB. Don't be an LS. Don't be a loser. That's actually, Rick, that's not what LS stands for. LS stands for something else. On my camera, this represents something called, let's go look. The image enhancements. LS. LS doesn't stand for looser, it stands for landscape. It produces vibrant landscapes and cityscapes. That sounds good, except that it's a lie. It doesn't actually change your RAW file. It lies to you on your display, and it illustrates an incorrect histogram. The histogram changes when you change your picture controls. You'll see words like standard, neutral, vivid. You'll see them on here, right? If you want truth about your histogram on the back of your display on your camera, set it to flat. It's dull, it's ugly, it's boring, it's truth. I'm going to read what mine says in my manual. Details are preserved over a wide tone range, from highlights to shadows. Choose for photographs that will later be extensively processed or retouched. I would add, it's a truer histogram when you shoot RAW. That's what it's called on Nikon. Now on Sony, they call it creative styles. Creative styles. It's the same thing. On Canon, it's called picture style, characteristics. Standard, portrait, landscape, fine. The best shot for you Canon shooters is neutral. Neutral, don't lie to yourself about the histogram. Suited for processing the image with a computer. That's what we're doing in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm almost done with you. There are two lies perpetuated in even the professional photography realm. One, you need a perfectly balanced or equalized or center-weighted mountain range for your histogram. It's a lie. Don't fall for it. The second lie is that you live and or you die by the histogram on the back of your camera display. That's also a lie, because that image, that histogram, is affected by two things: your color space and your picture or creative controls, your image controls. Both of those lie about the histogram. Even if you got them very, very close to truth, they're never true. You never get a true histogram until you open the image in Adobe Camera Raw. Watch my histogram as I go from landscape here, LS, to FL, which is flat. Notice, same photo, same subject, same light. All I did was change my image or picture control. That's wild. There's another. LS, FL flat, NL neutral, different. All of these shots were raw shots. Is it changing my raw file? No, it's not. Now let me show you the raw file histogram. That is closer to truth. That's closer to truth. I'm going to go up and let you see the back of my display. Particularly notice the areas I've marked in red and how different they were as I go back and forth. Big diff. All right, I'm really finished with you. Bottom line, hey, here's what I would do. I wouldn't live and die by the histogram. Not on the back of my display. I would set my camera's color space to Adobe RGB. I would set my image or picture or creative styles controls, depending upon my camera, to flat or neutral. You'll get closer to truth on the back of that display. Don't lie to yourself on the back of that display. Any questions on histogram, send them to me this week. I'll answer them on yours day. Thanks for watching the second bonus video of week 1, editing in Adobe Camera Raw. I hope you learned something of value.